Welcome back to the Start and Scale podcast. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and in this series, we're diving headfirst into the world of tech with the people who are coding the future from the front lines. This is the place where we refactor the way you think about scaling tech teams, debugging their journeys, reviewing their stories, and pushing boundaries to ship better insights. Whether you're a seasoned techie who's seen your fair share of legacy code, an aspiring professional ready to deploy your skills, or just fascinated by the world of technology, this episode will give you unique insights and practical takeaways to add to your backlog.
It's all about being humble and bringing people along and valuing people for what they can bring.
So grab your headphones, commit to this listen, and let's sprint into another episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Gary, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
Good. I mean, we've been, I've known you for ages. I'm surprised it's taken us this long for us to get it sorted.
Yeah.
But you've invited us down to the gorgeous Regatta offices.
Yeah.
They're huge. And we almost by accident started to dive into it. But could you tell us who you are and your journey to where you are now? Yeah.
So I am Gary Young, Head of Development at Regatta. So it's Regatta Group. Regatta Group because it incorporates not only the Regatta brand, but also Craghoppers and Dare to Be. That's not necessarily common knowledge either, that we have those three brands. We do, I've been working here 6 months now. This is a really great office right next to the Trafford Centre, so good location, just off the Bridgewater Canal. It's a great brand, great values, and it's part of the reason why I joined. Welcome.
Thank you. And you told me a few things previously about Regatta I didn't know. I mean, crazy amount of charity work. Mm-hmm. And they've got a connection with, is it Alder Hay Hospital?
Yes, Alder Hay Hospital, yeah. So I've got a personal connection to that as well, which I won't go into, but it was through that connection that I realized that Regatta were one of the founding backers, I should say, of a innovation lab at Alder Hay Children's Hospital. And the types of innovation we're talking about, using some of the latest technology like AI, AR, VR, that type of thing, not only to make patients' experience, and we're talking young children here, more comfortable, a better experience of going through what might be a whole series of operations throughout their young lives, but also helping the surgeons, doctors, nurses, enhance the work that they can do as well. So, that was something that really sort of turned me on to Regatta as an organization. So they have the Regatta Foundation. The Regatta Foundation, so much of the clothes, and a lot of clothing companies obviously are under scrutiny in terms of, the practices that they have in terms of, the labor that they use, etc. Regatta were one of the sort of earliest adopters of, better working practices, shall we say, in Asia. So most of the clothing is made in Bangladesh, and the Regatta Foundation has funded a school for the children of the workers, essentially. So it's a fully funded, privately owned school by Regatta Foundation. So there are lots of examples like that, but those are just some of the examples that I find it's a good place to work as a result. Yeah.
No, absolutely, and definitely want to get more into the Regatta as well, and what you're doing here, and what you're hired for, of course. But first and foremost, I guess, what was your journey to? Before we get to that, sorry, let me stop you there. I might have pre-warned you slightly to think about this question. I can't remember if I told you why, but Tax Vision is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job. Yeah, and it's customary that we always ask our guests to draw something for us. Right. I don't know if are you any good at drawing?
Well, you might find out from what I wanted to do as part of my job. So
I hope you didn't pick anything too complex.
Right, okay.
I would always suggest going stick person, but it's dealer's choice. Oh wait, hang on, you had a background in...
let's not preempt anything, but right, okay, so you want me to draw it. Right, okay, so let's see what I can do here.
Okay.
Okay.
Nice.
Let's see.
Okay, I think I've got it. This. wanted to be French.
Let's say just the traditional view of what an artist looks like. Yeah, so under pressure is a bit different, obviously.
Yes.
But so let's just say I really wanted to do something in the field of art or visual arts or something like that. And I've always enjoyed drawing. So
wow, can I show the camera
sure.
that? That's
just
brilliant.
a quick doodle, very quick doodle.
Amazing.
Yeah, very
quick. That's fantastic. Do you think, well, is that dream gone?
No, I wouldn't say so because, growing up, I loved anything related to visual storytelling, whether it be comic books, animation, cinema. I'm still really into all of that stuff, really enjoy it. And I enjoyed drawing, but part of it really was I enjoyed building things as well. So one of the things I loved, like most kids, was playing with Lego and, coming up with, having all of the different blocks. I never liked the Lego sets that you buy. I think a lot of kids, that's what they go for now, and that's what the parents buy, the sets that you buy and then you follow the instructions. I was never into that. I had a massive bag, and I think this is probably the same for most people, where we had those sets, we might have built them once and we immediately broke them down, we put them into a big bag, and we just had a huge stack of Lego bricks. And I just used to love making random stuff with that. So I think that kind of bleeds into the technology side of things as well. Just having all of these tools and all of these different things at your disposal is great, but then you've got to figure out how you're going to use them to make something completely unique. So,
I feel like people who aren't in tech and don't have a look into tech, or maybe like a very high level knowledge of technology, wouldn't see art and creativity being part of technology.
Absolutely.
But why? It's anyone who's watching who probably isn't like a super techie.
Yeah.
Why is creativity so important in coding?
Well, so I think creativity is really important in terms of, you are building something new from, some materials, essentially. That might be programming languages. It might be something that's low code. It might be different bits of software. So I, naturally kind of veered towards the multimedia aspect. I did a conversion course in multimedia. I'll go through that in a bit later. But through that, I learned programming, and I had no exposure to programming until I did a couple of modules in Java. And then I realized that I really enjoyed it, and not just the creative aspect of putting things together, but it was also the problem solving. That I had no idea that I had any sort of propensity for that at all, but I found that I really, really enjoyed that. And I think most programmers will relate to those kind of Eureka moments as well. When you find something that's really difficult and you work through it and you build your ways and means, your techniques to debug something, to find out what the problem is. And then having that Eureka moment, it's like no other feeling really, when you've solved something that you thought was previously impossible to solve. So that becomes quite addictive, and I think that's something that people really love when it comes to technology. It's the creative element, it's bringing all those, building blocks, making them into something, but then also facing the problems and solving the problems that come with building something. I think it's a combination of all of that. So yeah, it's not just the creative side, but there is a huge creative element to it.
It's interesting you say the problem solving side is addictive, because I think every technical person I know, I'll be speaking to them, and I always have silly ideas around things that wouldn't it be great if you had something that did this, or be set that could do that. And whereas most people would just kind of brush it off like, yeah, that'd be cool, yeah, whatever. If I ask someone in your position, for instance, they'll be like, oh yeah, maybe you could try doing this, and have you thought about maybe this could work? Or I read something that, and you can see that if you're dealing with technical people, they won't just like brush it off and move on. They'll be like, let's try and get to the bottom of this.
But then as you move through your career and you become, you get into those senior roles and you become more connected with the business and the customer, you start asking the question, well, why do you even want to do that? So it becomes, rather than it being about what cool thing can I make, or what new software can I learn, or, all of those sort of things, it becomes more around, well, what is it you're actually trying to solve? Because you go through those experiences where you try to solve problems that don't exist because you're actually looking for something that you enjoy doing or something that's fun, you realize that that's not really the approach, because you end up failing. And, so it's funny how it changes as you go out throughout your career.
It'd be interesting to know your thoughts on, because I think a lot of people, when they get to, again, your sort of level, there can be a jump that people need to make between being just technically minded and also commercially minded as well.
Yeah.
How do you think people can do that? And like, what would be the easiest route to become commercially minded if you're already not?
I think it's natural to not be commercially minded in the beginning, and I don't think people should be. I think they should be focused on learning the tools, and they should be focused on, flexing their creativity, and they should be allowed to do that. But there should be avenues for that. Things like having time set aside every week or every other week, to do things like I don't know, hackathons, things like that, where people can explore their creativity. Things that are, focused on a problem, but it's not necessarily a business problem. It's just something that, we're doing for fun. I think those are the areas that, we should be allowing people to explore their creativity, because that's how you learn. That's how children learn. That's how we all learn, exploring our creativity. If we're only focused on, business problems in the beginning, then we're not sort of gathering all the skills that we need in order to then later on focus on those business problems. So I think we need to, give people the space, especially as juniors, to be creative and try different things and try different areas, and not, put too much pressure on them to be solving business problems. But later on down the line, then, that's where you need to get more focused, because you've gathered all of those skills, much like, children who go through primary school. There's a big focus on play. There's a big focus on using certain tools and toys and all that sort of stuff to really enjoy the learning. But then later on in your learning journey, or in your career as it may be, you then start focusing on how you put that into practice, and you get more focused. And that's how it should be in the career of a software developer as well, I would say.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. And before we go too far ahead, I do want to come back to your journey. So I got a bit way late.
Yeah, sure.
So how did you get into tech?
So I got into tech. My original degree was completely unrelated, to be honest. And I, like a lot of people when I left school, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I went into something that I thought I could do well at. So I studied history and film studies. It was a good university, really enjoyed it. And it was around 2002. So it was 2 years after I graduated. I am that old. And the dot-com bubble hadn't burst yet, but it did burst when I was part of the way through. I was living in Scotland at the time, where I'm from, and there was a Scottish government funded program to get people into web development. So essentially there was a multimedia and interactive systems master's program that I went into. I thought, given my background of enjoying sort of design and illustration and animation, all that sort of thing, that's really what I wanted to do. So there was director development, which was the kind of precursor to Flash. Flash was just coming in at that point. So Flash is a program which obviously is ancient history now, was the new thing on the block, the new kid on the block at that time. I absolutely loved it. I was able to combine, tech aspects and learning that tech side of things, along with the, illustration and the art and all that sort of thing. So, things like CD-ROMs and interactive games and all that sort of stuff. But what they did was, and what was really good with this program, was that they also combined that with some proper software development. So we did 2 modules in Java development, which, I didn't even know at that point what Java was. Sometimes I saw the Java plugin come up with the coffee cup. When you're on the web, you don't know what it is. And certainly didn't realize it was a programming language. I was bamboozled on the first module, and I think I managed to scrape my way through. The second module, we had to actually build something. So we had to build an object-oriented airline booking system. Very simple, but I think it was during part of the way through a 16-hour session in the 24-hour computing labs that I had my Eureka moment, and I broke it, and I realized, okay, this is what it's all about. I'd even had some sessions with somebody that I knew through working in a video store, Blockbuster. That's how old I am. Oh. I used to work in Blockbuster, and there was somebody who worked for a computer gaming company part-time, and he was a Java developer, and I asked him to explain Java to me. We had a couple of sessions. I still didn't get it. He was talking about bananas and apples and all that. I just didn't get it. I didn't know what he was talking about. So anyway, post that Eureka moment, I just got it, and I loved it instantly. From something that you just dread and hate and don't understand to something that all of a sudden you just get. And I think pretty much everybody that's learned a programming language or programming languages that I've spoken to have had that Eureka moment, and they just don't turn back from that point. And I was the same. So I actually really went hard down that programming route. I still maintained for the first part of my career the multimedia aspect. I was building games. I was building sort of websites for kids' brands and things like that, and learning PHP, building e-commerce sites. E-commerce sites that were pretty rudimentary, but they worked. They did what they needed to do, and it was from scratch as well. I wasn't using sort of plugins and WordPress and all that sort of stuff either. So I was building things from scratch, which is what we used to do until all of these things came in, and probably full of horrendously full of security issues, etc. But anyway, we'll move on from that. I moved. I'd actually moved down south to the Midlands to get into the industry because in Scotland there just weren't any jobs in technology at that point because of the dot-com bubble bursting. And then I went back to Scotland, worked in the oil industry. So two of the biggest companies in the world I was doing work for, BP and Shell, Tacker Britannia. They were the largest. Sixth largest energy company in the world at the time. And then that's the point where I got into project management. So I was complaining about how an e-learning project was being managed because I had previous experience of it being done well. Not that I did it myself, I just witnessed it being done well. So I was kind of thrown into the deep end, and the CEO of the company at the time said, right, okay, Gary's going to manage it. And I just had this sinking feeling like, how am I going to do this? This huge company, sixth largest energy company in the world, I need to project manage their e-learning induction for all of the North Sea employees. So it was in the region of about 10,000 employees that had to go through this e-learning program, and there was video and all sorts of stuff. And I was also the lead developer on the project. So I had to develop the project and project manage it and do all of the client relationship stuff. For me at the time, it was a big project in terms of value. So it was about £150,000 project. Which rested on my shoulders, and I had to make it happen. And we did make it happen. It was a success, and received some good feedback, and I never really looked back. So I did a Prince 2 qualification at that point as well. So I knew that I didn't want to go fully down the project management route because it's just not me. I wanted to deal with people. I wanted to build teams. I wanted to have those sort of interactions. So that was the thing that I really enjoyed from that experience of project managing, was actually the interaction with the team, getting the best out of the people, and encouraging people to sort of build their skills and develop their careers and things like that. Because it was a cross-functional team I had to manage. So I moved to the Northwest about 10 years ago. That was through meeting my wife, whose career was taking her down here, hence the connection with Alder Hey. And it just so happens that the northwest of England was just this absolute, gold mine of opportunities in tech, based, compared to where I was coming from. The opportunities were pretty limited. There were big opportunities because the oil industry in Aberdeen was booming at the time, but there were a very small number of jobs, and not much room to move. So coming down to the northwest was great. I had to sort of crack the nut and, find ways in. But eventually I found my way into, after a couple of roles, tiresandthedrive.com. I think within a year I was head of development there. So that was really good. It took somebody moving on and me basically, saying to the new CEO, I can do this, and him giving me an opportunity. So thank you, Ray. That was a great opportunity. I hope, I think I can say I haven't looked back from that. That involved a reasonable sized transformation. So it was going from monolith to microservice architecture. Had never done that before, so it was a huge learning curve for me. Being very data-driven as well. It's still one of the most data-driven businesses I've worked in. And I've worked in some much larger businesses than that now, but they were very data-driven, and some of the things that they were doing was quite interesting. I was part of that, but learned from a lot of other really good people, so really good individuals at that business. There were some people that were at Ocado as well, so there was a lot around automation and automated scheduling and things that I learned. E-commerce, that's where I gained a lot of my, experience and skills. That's where I cut my teeth, I guess, Tires on the Drive. So it was a great experience. And then from there moved on to Misguided. So, I guess we became acquainted at Tires on the Drive, and you were helping me hire a lot of people at Tires on the Drive, which I think was a pretty fruitful engagement. That was pre-tacked for you, but yeah, I know it was. Yeah. I'm just recounting the time when Jack, you cold called me on an extension in the office.
There you go.
And I think I swore at you, and then I felt bad about it. So, and yeah, we took things forward from there. So
there you go. Cold calling works. Cold calling works.
I'm not advocating swearing. But yeah, anyway. Yeah. So, and then from there, I moved on to Misguided. So that was a much bigger business. So I think when I moved there, it was about 275 million a year, and they got there in 10 years. So they were like this rocket ship, kind of Phoenix, kind of unicorn, I should say, not Phoenix. They were like a unicorn in e-commerce in the UK generally. They were just one of those names. And I will be honest, I didn't really realize that. I'd heard of Misguided, and it wasn't until other people were telling me about it after I joined, the kind of name that it was in the industry. So that was very interesting experience. They were also replatforming. They were actually earlier in the sort of transformation journey in terms of using data, and they weren't they were still on Magento basically when I joined. But a big part of the reason why I joined was because they were about to embark on a replatforming, and they went to headless architecture, headless front end, and that was all happening while I was there. We went into COVID lockdown, and for Misguided was one of those few businesses where things just took off rather than going in the other direction. So the first couple of weeks of lockdown, our revenues dropped to the point where we thought, okay, the writing's on the wall, and everyone was very worried. Within a couple of weeks, the US-based influence, we've been trying to break into the US market, and the US-based influencers started wearing, promoting leisure wear or leisure wear in America, they would call it, the hoodies and sweatpants and all that sort of stuff. And then Misguided, as others did, like Boohoo, etc., very quickly pivoted, switched their source of where they were getting the materials from, etc. And without sort of discussing figures, it was a huge turnaround, and the company was doing far better than it ever had within 16 weeks. And so a lot of that was, as you would expect, being plowed back into the business to grow the business even further. If you look at other, businesses like Boohoo, for example, there was a point where Misguided were bigger than Boohoo, and then Boohoo overtook and went, multi-billion. So Misguided, I think, always had an eye on something similar. Why wouldn't you? So a lot of investment went into software development because we were going to expand the team. And this was at the time of Shein coming in as well. I think that's how you pronounce it. And they came in and they were just uber quick, like super fast, how they grew. So again, it was like, right, we need to keep up with that. So there's a lot of investment went in. And for me, that meant expanding the team. I mean, in terms of numbers, I'll be honest, it was a combination of permanent, nearshore, and we worked with And Digital as well as a development partner. But it was somewhere between 2 and 3 times we scaled the development team at that point. So yeah, that was an interesting time.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to dive in. Ties and Drive scale the team, Misguided scale the team, different levels.
Yeah.
Challenges that came up. What were the main challenges? Not only the fact that you were trying to do this whole replatforming gig and then also scale the team at the same time. Yeah, what were the challenges that came up?
Well, so the different challenges with the different aspects of where the resource was coming from. So we worked with a development partner, and development partners, just by their very nature, will have their own ethos, their own standards, their own way of working. The people that they hire, all of that, all has to tally with their vision of how they want to work. Okay, and that doesn't necessarily always match with the company that they're coming in to work with. So where I think those development partner relationships work is where they set up, an isolated team. Like for example, the Misguided the new mobile app, which we decided together with And Digital would be built in React Native. That was really good because they could, their mobile experts were there. They were able to, talk a good game around what technology we should go for and help us with that decision. They were able to go ahead and build, the first iterations, and then gradually over time hand it over to our teams. So, but where it does work, I would say, is where you've got that, sort of segmented team that go off and, they've got a set of goals and they go off and deliver. And they can present based on that, and they can show the ROI and all that sort of stuff. That's where it does work. Now, when it comes to nearshore, I would say if you get the right company, augmentation absolutely can work, because what tends to happen with the nearshore is that they're an aggregator company, if you like. They're looking at their local market and they're bringing people in, but they're not necessarily all tied to the vision of the company who are providing the resources. Actually, they're just local people looking for a job, and you can bring them in and you can mold them and shape them, to your vision as much as you need to. But what you've got there is you've obviously got a more cost-effective resource. You've got a company that can replace them as well as needed. If somebody decides they're going to leave, they can replace them. One of the key watch-outs, we did work, I'm not going to name any names, but we did work with a nearshore agency that they had basically in the contract, they said it's a 4-week window. So within the 4 weeks, so somebody will hand in the notice, they have to give 4 weeks notice to us. Before that 4 weeks is up, we will have replaced that person. Okay. Right. But what we were finding was that they weren't giving us the notice until at least a week in, because they were spending a week trying to persuade the person to stay. And that was, happening all the time. And we ended up with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks without somebody in that role. So we had gaps all over the place. So what we did was we actually went with again, just no need to go into names, but we went in with a Manchester-based agency that had a number of different nearshore providers that they could go to in different regions. So it was almost like a gateway into that. And they made sure, and we had an agreement with them that we would have no gaps. Huh. So essentially we ended up with, if somebody said they were leaving, and we had a lot less people saying they were leaving, I think they just dealt with their staff better. They would have a 2-week crossover. So we even had 2-week handovers happening. And that was a much better situation.
It was seamless for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But actually it was less of an issue anyway, because they seemed to have less people coming and going. So
I feel like the offshore conversation is coming back up again.
Yes.
It seems to go through cycles, right? Like, all of a sudden offshore, people move away from offshore, then they go back to offshore.
Yeah.
Obviously depending on price and all that sort of stuff. But offshore seems like a no-brainer a lot of the time. Well, nearshore, sorry. If you can find the right team and they're at a lower cost and, the whole people having the notice in, you get all past that. What's the downside of, why wouldn't you?
So I think there's a number of different factors. So if you take Poland, for example, so Poland is somewhere that a lot of people are going on holiday to now. It's like, it seems to be the place to be and the place to go. A lot of people are going there. The reason for that, because the economy is on the up, and also the smaller Baltic countries, you might have seen figures recently, their GDPs and all that is all improving. It's all a part of being associated with Europe, and also things like, nearshoring and things like that. So economies of these places are improving, which means the prices go up because they have a higher standard of living. For example, it's more expensive to hire somebody on a nearshore basis in Poland than it is in Portugal at the moment, because the Polish, because the cost of living in Warsaw is higher than it is in, sorry, that's not actually correct. The cost of living is actually higher in Lisbon, so it doesn't really match up for them. But the cost of a resource is less in Portugal than it is in Poland at the moment. So so the figures, it really depends on what the figures are doing. If you weren't going to hire somebody in Poland, you might have hired in the past somebody in Belarus, or you might have hired somebody in Ukraine. See what's happened there. So our nearshore that was working really well for us at Misguided was actually all based in Belarus. And then the war happened. And then they all had to be transported by this company I was talking about, who were Manchester based. And they were organizing flights and things like that. So the ironic thing was for Belarusians is they couldn't fly anywhere because they were banned from leaving the country, apart from Russia. The only place they could go to was Russia. So they all flew to Russia and then flew out from Russia because there were no flights banned from Russia. So they left Belarus that way. So a lot of these people, if not all of them that we were working with, are now based in somewhere in Europe or the Caucasus or a place like that.
But it just seems like an amazing way to build something at a lower cost, more flexibility. Yeah, it just seems like a great idea, and you see more and more people now looking at it. I mean, that tends to be how a lot of startups start, right? They'll find a team offshore or nearshore and go with those guys first, before building their own team this side of wherever they are. But again, but why? Like, why would you not just stay with a nearshore or offshore team?
I'm not the right person to ask, because I advocate remote working, and I advocate working with these, regions. And again, my previous role, the one I didn't mention, most of my team were in Colombia, and we had, and had great results working with people over there. Time zone can obviously be a challenge, depending on who you're working with. But you could be working with people in South Africa, for example. That's quite a big region for nearshoring at the moment. Well, it's kind of not quite nearshore, but offshore at least anyway, because they're only 1 or 2 hours out from the UK time zone. I think the only reason I can think of is, instability for some of these regions, and maybe it's the remote working where, people are just getting into this mindset where we need to see people in the office, we need to see what they're doing. Maybe there's been some bad experiences. There was that example of somebody that worked at Google, I think, that was farming all his work out to somebody in China. Yeah, that was a few years ago. So he was subcontracting somebody to do his job. It was Google or one of the big tech companies in America. And I think he was jailed, actually, because it's fraud. But, that's what he was doing. Because they noticed there was VPN traffic coming from China and they thought they were being hacked. But it was constant. And it was basically somebody who was just giving somebody access to his laptop to go and do his work. And he was paying them half what he was getting paid, or probably even a lot less. Was just putting his feet up all day, or doing other work,
Yeah.
That is something, to be honest with you. Again, don't need to name the company or the region, but I did have some experience of some people that clearly had more than one job, which I think in some countries is quite common. So they might have more than one job, and they might be, because of the economy there, and they might be studying as well. So they're doing all of these things. They can't possibly be giving you all their full attention. So yeah, I think that's that type of thing as well, potentially.
Yeah. And obviously scaling teams, again, done it at quite a few different places now. Hiring is tough. It's weird for me to say that, because when we first started hiring, we're a recruitment business. You think we'd be really good at it. When we first started hiring for tax, we were crap at it. We got it really wrong. When you're hiring for people, it's the technical skills part. That's pretty easy to look at. I guess soft skills. What kind of soft skills are you looking for when you're hiring people?
I'll start with technical skills. Technical skills should be a given for people, obviously, that are coming in for certain roles. For more junior roles, definitely tech skills take a back seat. You're looking for the right attitude, because we can teach the tech skills. I think most people that are hiring will say that. People, being able to collaborate, understand that, their ideas aren't the only ideas, that they're not always going to be right. To be humble, all of those things are really, really important. And I would say in most cases more important than the tech skills. I know that's quite a simplistic way to put it, because obviously you need the tech skills, but if you're really thinking about it in those terms, I would rather have in my team somebody who's got a reasonable level of skills in technology and understands the concepts and all of those things, can hold their own, but is able to collaborate, is able to communicate, super important, get their ideas across, as opposed to somebody who's an absolute genius that, just can't communicate and won't collaborate with anyone. I've had recent experience of that. And it's, on the face of it, it seems like this person's getting through a lot of work and they are really technically competent and they're telling us all of these like really complicated things that we need to do. And then over time you realize that actually they're just driving things that they're interested in and things that they want to do. And they're not sort of aligned with the team and they're not really driving towards the outcomes that we've all agreed we need to drive towards. Basically people working on their own agenda because they love technology and they love what they do, but they're not really aligned with what you're trying to achieve. You can do without that, basically. The ideal is obviously that you have it all. You've got somebody who's an absolute technical genius and they can collaborate, communicate, work towards the goals, in a collaborative way. But if you had to choose, then you're always going to choose people that can collaborate.
Yeah, because it must come up quite a lot if there's a project that you're working on and half the room decides that they want to do it one way, half the room decides they want to do it the other way. You end up going with option B. So half the people feel a little bit like, I'm kind of not with this. Mm-hmm. I guess you want someone who's just going to go, you know what? I understand the overall goal.
Yeah.
So it's not how I wanted to do it, but let's get on with it anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what that would be called. Collaboration is probably one word for it, but
yeah, it's being humble. And it's just accepting that there's a higher purpose to what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and that is the goals of the business. That's the higher purpose. That's what we're all here for. What is the bottom line? What is it we're all striving for? And it's not ego. That's not what we're striving for. It's not to satisfy somebody's personal agenda for, how they feel about themselves and their technical skills. It's how we all collaborate together to create something that's of value. I think it's really telling when, people, not only recognize the ideas of others, but, give other people airtime, encourage other people to do better work, give people credit where credit's due as well. I think that's a really important leadership quality. So if somebody's come up with an idea, don't just appropriate that idea as your own. Make sure that they, even if they're a junior person, make sure that they are the ones who are credited all the way through for having that idea, and that is something that, people look on that better than somebody who just takes all the credit for themselves. I would say.
Almost if you do the way of being too no, it wasn't me. It was kind of like the person. And what you said before about being humble, I think so much can be achieved if you're not obsessed with being right all the time.
Yeah,
that's really something I've learned more and more recently. It's quite amazing when you have that mentality. You get so much done.
Yeah. And I think I think it's as you grow up and you're going through school and university and things like that, it's easy to become judgmental. It's easy to think, okay, so I did well at that thing, so that means that I'm this type of person and this type of person isn't. But you need to look at it much more broadly, because everybody's good at something, and a lot of people are not good at other things, and it's don't put yourself above anyone. Just look at what are people good at, and utilize those skills and work on that. Rather than judging somebody for not being, in your view, good at a particular thing. So it's not explaining that very well, but again, it's all about sort of being humble and bringing people along, and valuing people for what they can bring.
Yeah, people remember it, right? I mean, how would you interview for that though? Like those skills when you're, say hiring for a software engineer, for instance.
Well, I mean, introducing certain scenarios. For example, how would you react to somebody, basically discrediting something that you've said, or coming in with a different view, or somebody that wants to take a different approach or change the scope of a project, and just give sort of scenarios like that. It might be, a product manager comes in and says X, or, that type of thing I think is useful, just to see what their response might be. And obviously you can get sort of canned responses to that type of thing, but if you can probe it a little bit, I think people that are quite often, I'm not going to say all the time, but quite often people that are overly opinionated and bloody minded and all that sort of stuff, they usually show their cards.
Yeah.
In some way or another in an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I always shout about how I don't think one-stage interviews can be a bad thing, because
absolutely.
Yeah, because you can as a recruiter saying that, it's kind of bad really, because recruiters tend to want you to just
no, it's not. You're being honest, and I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's because well, firstly, the person needs a little bit more time to buy into the business before they work there, but also you need to see like 2 or 3 times really to because it's very easy to control or pretend to be someone else for an hour and a half.
Yes.
But then for like maybe 4 hours continuously, after being probed across being and speaking to like 4 or 5 different people, it's hard to keep that mask up.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. It's that probing and asking why and how and why that. And,
but also is that whole experience of them coming in. How were they with the person that met them at the door?
Sure.
If it's you that meets them at the door, fine. If it's somebody else, try and pick up, were there any kind of vibes, anything that, because sometimes you'll get little comments like, oh, they came in a bit late and I made a comment and they were a bit shirty, and you can pick up things like that. Walk them out to the door when they've just relaxed after the interview and just see what they say on the way out and things like that. Just try and get to who they really are. And you've got to do that over multiple interviews, definitely. Maybe chat to them about something that's a bit more kind of personal. See if you just reveal themselves a bit, I think. But a lot of it, I don't know. Some of it's intuition. A lot of it's intuition. Like what you pick up from body language and things like that. And how people hold themselves, how they respond to certain things. It's not always a science. Sometimes it's just a feeling.
Yeah, and it's tough, isn't it? Because especially with the CV is tough to really look at and go yes or no, because it is literally all of your mistakes hidden and all of your accomplishments embellished. and then it's your job.
I'd never hire somebody off a CV or a LinkedIn because it's all, no, I was going to say it's all lies. It's not. It's, there's a percentage of it that won't be true, 100, completely true.
We've all watched The Apprentice, right? When Claude gets them in that room, and tears them apart.
yeah. So you've got to speak to people. That's the important thing. Yeah. And like you say, you've got to speak to them over more than one interview. I think the most I've had was probably 4 or 5, to be honest. So US companies are really big on that, having multiple interviews.
Yeah.
So I gather. I think, and some of those, the one that I'm talking about, were they were just kind of informal chats, but it was an interview because you're speaking to different senior people that want to sort of get to know you. Can they work with you? That type of thing. I think Google do 7. I think they do 7. Yeah,
that surprised me.
Yeah. But I think they do them fairly short order. It doesn't necessarily take a long time, but they do. It's about 7 that they do.
Yeah.
You could argue that's overkill. I mean, you should really have picked up who that person is by that point. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah. And it depends if you're doing technical tests as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you do around technical? Because the technical bit seems to be like the easiest bit to really delineate if someone can do it. Yes.
Well, so it depends on how you define a technical test. It depends on the approach that you take, what you do. So I tried all sorts of different things. What you definitely don't do, in my view, is send somebody a test and then have them send it back. I've definitely done that in the beginning of my career. I think I probably did that via yourself as well. And then obviously people are going to do is, especially nowadays, they just go to ChatGPT and it'll just give them the answer. But before they would Google it and they would just find examples where people have done something similar. And that became sort of obvious when you hire somebody and then they couldn't do the thing that they did in the test, which was supposed to be quite a simple thing.
Yeah.
Because actually they'd copied it from someone else or got somebody else to do it for them. So experimented with various different approaches. The best approach that I've found, and this is not just me, but working with teams, it's really, really key to work with the senior and lead developers in your teams to come up with the best way to test. Most of them will not agree with technical tests because a lot of them don't. They just think they've had experiences of them where they just feel like it's a waste of time, all that sort of stuff. You're testing me on things that I'll never use, etc. But the best compromise I found was where there's not actually a specific set test. They will come in with, it'll be in person. They'll bring in their own laptop, their own setup, so it's something they're comfortable with. You're not giving them something that they're not comfortable with. So they come in with their own laptop, their own ID, all of that, and they walk through the senior developers. There might be probably no more than 2 senior developers, possibly 1-to-1 is better. A project that they have worked on that they're proud of, something that's recent, and they walk through it. And they, answer questions and, maybe even go into some of the, under the hood and into some of the code and explain some of the code and the logic and, maybe add some comments, in front of the person sitting next to them so that, that they show that they understand what it is that they've actually developed, So that is actually a good way. So it's not really a technical test. It's more of a discussion on something technical that they've done and a bit of a sort of deep dive into it. So it shows that they can prove that they did actually develop it with some of the questions that they're asked. If you were to develop this, how would you do it? And they explain the kind of process that they would go through. So it's a bit like a more in-depth technical interview rather than a technical test.
I guess you're also then seeing how you would work with them on a day-to-day basis, right? And how they take criticism.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna get into peer programming, that's essentially what you'd be doing. Peer programming. So maybe if they did have a programming exercise, they might just do it with pseudocode as well.
Sure.
Rather than actually writing the code itself. So those are the types of things around that area. But I would say the key thing is involve your senior and lead developers and ask them, well, how would you want somebody to be tested? What do you think are the important things that people need to know? Obviously the seniors and the leads that you really trust and you work closely with. But I think that is a really key thing is, putting trust in your existing team to really flesh out and drive those processes. Don't try and do it on your own.
That's great. And when you're deciding how you're going to build a team out, I think you've done this a few times. Because the way a team is structured, there's a lot of different methodologies to how people like to structure teams, right? There's tribes and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do you do it, and what's where do you start? say you've got this whole platforming that you're going through, this platform you're going through. Where do you start from saying, right, this is how the team should look?
Right, so it obviously depends on the business and what the business is doing. If it was an e-commerce business and everything is focused around the e-commerce website, and that's the center of, that's where the customers interact, then, there are traditional models for how you would split that up. So you'd split that up according to different parts of the funnel. So you might have a team that's very front-end focused, that's dealing with the homepage, the product pages, the sort of the entry pages into the site. And there might be SEO involved there. There might be, different things like A/B testing and things like that require a lot of front-end skills. Mm-hmm. And then you might have a team that's focused on, once they're in the funnel, getting them to convert, right? So people that are focused on the product list page, the product, description pages, PLP, PDPs, and all of the different mechanisms that you put in place in order to kind of drive conversion within those. And then you might have a more kind of specialized, predominantly back-end team that's focused on checkout. And then you probably have a team, and like a company like Misguided, there were various different payment methods and mechanisms. And the checkout team was one of the most technical and one of the most important teams in a company like Misguided, for example. And then you might have post-purchase, like all of the different things that go on, like returns, how the returns are handled, and portals that handle those, sorts of things, where people can go to register the return, the processes in the warehouse, all of that sort of stuff. So everything that's happened after you purchase. So that's one example with an e-commerce company. If there are various different products, like for example at Regatta, we have websites, and you might divide the teams along those lines that I've just described. But we also have internal systems like warehouse management system. We have an integration platform that I'm in charge of at the moment. And so what you would go for is a kind of product-based structure. So you have teams that are focused on either an entire product or aspects of that product, so they can make that product or part of the product as good as it can be. So it's that if you have too wide a focus, too wide a remit, then it's almost like you're context switching across all these different things, and you're not really sharpening your skills in that one area. Yeah. You can obviously rotate people around those teams, but really what you want are those dedicated product teams, because then that plugs into your product, your overall sort of product teams, like product managers, product owners, who are then working with those teams. And you have, backlogs that are, really well refined, focused on all of the right items that are required in order to make that product or that part of the product as good as it can be. So Spotify do that, for example. So if you look at the Spotify interface, every single different component in the Spotify interface, whether it's the search, whether it's the recommendations, whether it's the player, whether it's, whatever you like, the playlist view or whatever, all of those have their own specific team, and they're all completely autonomous as well. So they might use different programming languages. I'm not saying this is the way to go, but it's how Spotify do it. And they're completely autonomous. So they're all aligned. So there's a high level of autonomy, but there's also a high level of alignment as well. So if you read about the Spotify model, that's how they work, and that's what they say is the best kind of approach. And I do agree, because the autonomy means that people who love to build things get the space to do so in the best way that they can. They don't have to use all the tools that somebody that they only meet once a month tells them they should be using. They're highly technical people. They go for it in the way that they see best, so they can use their creative skills and et cetera, and all their technical skills, put it all in. And as long as they are aligned in terms of they're all working to the same milestones, the same metrics, then that creates the alignment across all of those sections. So that's one way to think of how you would segment the teams. Then you need to think of, okay, for each team, what's a good number? What's a good size of a team? What are the different people? What are the different components within that team? Do we need tests? Do we need a product person associated with it? What's the makeup? Is it front end, back end? Depends on what they're doing. And that might kind of rotate around. But what you really want is a kind of core team of people that doesn't change too much over time, so you don't have churn. And people are, create is almost like synapses in your brain. They're just firing off each other, and they become more and more effective and more efficient as time goes on, because they're getting to know each other and they're working better with each other all the time, because they're learning all the different, ins and outs of working with the same people, basically. Sure. They know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, all of that. And it's, it's very common knowledge that, there are, theories, especially in kind of psychology, where There's only so many different things that our brains can process at any one given time. So 7 plus minus 1, is a popular standard where, you can only have 7 plus or minus 1 things in your brain at any one time. So for that really determines how many people you should have in a team. So you shouldn't have any more than 7, 8, or 9 people really, 6, 7, or 8, 7 plus minus 1, in your team. So you really go for a team of around 7. And those are the people that you interact with on a regular basis. So that would include the developers, test. These are the people that you're constantly working with. You can have a model where there's a separate test team, and development develops something and then throw it over the wall to test. I don't believe in that. I think that test should be working closely with a development team, in a kind of pod, if you like, and working together to get those items across the board, into a completed state. Those teams need to be enabled as well with all the tools, CI/CD, processes, all of those sort of things, in order to kind of rapidly innovate, constant releases, all that sort of stuff. So, and there might be teams that are there just to support just that. You might have one person per team who can support that, and they do it in their own way. So maybe people are kind of multi-skilled and they can do that. Or there's a book called Team Topologies, where they talk about enabling teams, where there's a team who just goes around and makes sure that all the teams are enabled to get their work out as fast as they can, in the most effective way. So there's different models, of achieving that. I go for, as much as possible, people that have got as many kind of cross-functional skills as possible, that they can kind of move around in the different within the different skill sets within a team, and they're kind of self-contained, if you like, as much as possible, and they're just delivering all the time. So and all of that can be metric driven, obviously, so they're always hitting targets and always improving, looking at velocity, looking at cycle time, looking at churn in terms of the work that's coming in, what's changing, all of that sort of stuff, and good agile processes. So it's not rocket science. It's quite fun putting these things together.
I was going to say, it sounds fun.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be. It's building. It's just like building something from Lego. You're building something up, but the main thing. If you were to ask me for one word that drives all of it, is communication. It's the most important thing. And with all those different teams, to not communicate would be the easiest thing in the world. Where people just get their heads down. So you've got to maintain the communication. You've got to make sure that those communication channels can scale as well. So thinking about agile at scale, thinking about scrum of scrums and things like that, where you bring everybody together periodically to share backlogs and milestones and where we are and where we're going, all of that sort of stuff. Making sure that we do things like sprint demos so that people can see the results of the work. But yeah, communication is the watchword, definitely.
It must be very rewarding if you go from, say, 3 years prior, where you say, right, this is what the team's going to look like, and then in 3 years, 2 years, whatever, at the end of it, you've built your dream organogram, and it's all running smoothly like a machine. It must be like, oh, amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
not that happens.
Yeah,
often.
I think that really happens, but and I think it's always moving. It's always changing. So you have a plan, you start out on that plan, and that plan almost immediately changes. It's that type of thing. Because the business goals might change, the business fortunes might change, so certainly gone from scaling up quickly to scaling down almost as quickly. I've done that a couple of times, based on, the bottom line, essentially. The best laid plans of mice and men often gang agley, as Robert Burns would have said.
Wow, way over my head, what he said. And going back to, because we talked about development agencies before, and you went with a Misguided, didn't you? I think
yes, yeah, and digital, yeah.
And that was for the mobile team.
So that was mobile, but they were also helping us across a few different areas. So there was quite a few people working with us at one point.
And that was kind of like when they weren't just in a siloed team, it kind of was like it was working okay, but not great. But when it was a mobile team, it was like that worked fantastically well.
Yeah.
And is that because? Well, kind of like what you just said there, right? Is these silo? I hate the word silo. Probably not the right word for it, is it? But
it was more to do with so when they were in control of their own destiny in terms of bringing their own philosophy and way of working, and the majority of the team were the development agency. I'm not going to specifically say because I think this could be the case with any development agency. Sure. And maybe you added one or two permanent people over time, then they at that point you would hope they've already proven their philosophy. They've already shown that the way that they can do things is a good way to do things. That's why you brought them in, right?
Sure.
But if it works the other way, where they're kind of trying to augment something that already exists, and they're coming in and saying, "Oh, you don't do it that way. You do it this way," because they're experienced and confident and educated and to a certain level, then that doesn't always wash. Because I think as long as the people that I think the key is the people that you are bringing in to augment the team have to be the type of people that are flexible to start working the way that team are already working. One or two people coming into a team that's numbers more than that one or two people saying, no, you need to change how you're working, I don't think ever goes well.
No.
So that's exactly it.
How do you make the decision to bring on a development agency rather than building an entire team out?
Well, I think it's where you identify something big that you've never done before. Right. That these agencies have got experience of. And where they can come in and they can, again, communication, they can win the hearts and minds. They've got the confidence of the board because the board have been part of the decision to bring them in. That is massive, because they can come in and say, well, like Ant Digital, for example, we did this digital transformation for British Airways, huge organization. They developed their app, or we did this for this company, so they come in with that confidence. Whereas when you're building something internally, you're bringing in lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. Some of them have got impressive CVs, some of them less so because they might be more junior, or you've just brought them in because of their skill set, but they just haven't done anything big before. Understandably, there's going to be a bit more fear. There's going to be less confidence. I guess if you're going to do it internally, you need to have the confidence of the board to be able to do that. So I think that's really where you make that decision. How important is this for the business? Have the existing people done this type of thing before? Do they have experience of it? If they have, and you've got somebody there that's done something like that, and they've got that gravitas and that sway, then that might be the way to do it. But I wasn't part of the decision to bring in a development agency. That decision was already made. And I'm not saying I necessarily would have made that decision retrospectively, but it certainly didn't go badly. And one of the really big things with And, I think that, not to kind of, over promote somebody, but what they would do is they would bring sort of learnings along with it. So they were very good at sort of running courses and augmenting their development expertise with bringing up the skill level of your team. And that was seen as a big plus. And I've not worked with another development agency that does that to that level. So we were running sessions, workshops, all that sort of stuff that they were running them basically on our behalf. They actually would only do them initially before COVID. They would only do them on their premises. But then during COVID, obviously it was all online. So we got much higher engagement because we didn't have to travel to Leeds or go into central Manchester because we were based down at Salford Quays. And then post-COVID, they started coming into the office because they had that closer engagement, and we just asked them come in on a Friday and do them. So there was that kind of two-way thing that was going on. So I think there was a lot of value in that. I don't know. It's one of those things, because there are pros and cons definitely of working with the development agencies. And a lot of it is a big sell as well. Sure. And one of the things I spoke to somebody at another business who'd worked with a development agency, and they just said, before we started working with And one of the things that they said was just to watch out for is sometimes these businesses will give you their best people for the first couple of months, and then they'll start drip feeding in the lesser experienced people, and the best people then go on to the next thing. Which you can imagine, any business is going to want to utilize their best people, but you just have to be conscious of that and make sure you're not losing their best people at a key critical time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And look, you might have covered this throughout the conversation, but a question I always like to ask, you talked about problem solving before.
Yeah.
What is the most interesting problem you solved?
I don't know about interesting, but it was certainly a valuable problem to solve. So when I was working at Tires on the Drive, we did a transformation from a monolithic .NET application into microservices, and it wasn't a transitional kind of release, if you like. So it was a bit more of a kind of big bang. We went from monolithic into services. And completely hold my hands up, there wasn't enough time, I would say, to really properly analyze that all of these services were doing exactly as they needed to do. And the business wanted to run an A/B test, rather than just going straight to the new website, and it was the right thing to do. They wanted to see what's the conversion on a daily basis. So people would be redirected either to the old monolithic site, which we'd updated with a fresh kind of take on the front end, or go to the new website that was headless and microservices and all of that. And it was we'd put a lot of effort into making the front end extremely responsive. It was a lot faster, etc. But we were seeing that conversion was actually worse on the new site compared to the old site, which didn't make a lot of sense because the conversion was already not very good on the old site because it wasn't a very responsive front end, etc. And it took admittedly, it did take a little while to figure out. We were looking at the figures and we were always winning throughout the day. So we were looking at the Google Analytics figures and we could see that we were winning throughout the day and it was converting better. We were feeling, and this happened for a couple of weeks. Next day we'd come in and we'd lost. Like how can that happen? You were winning all day, right? But then obviously it twigs after a couple of weeks. Well, it's because it's whatever's happening in the evening after we've gone home. Okay, so Tires on the Drive had a next day offering, but there was a cutoff, and this is what made it complicated. There was a 6 p.m. cutoff for next day. So after 6 p.m., that's when we started showing the next day tires. So we're actually showing next day from 6 p.m. till midnight. Huh. Okay, so there was a 6 p.m. till midnight saying, okay, these are the tires that you can get tomorrow, essentially, right? We realized that, and it wasn't something that was fully appreciated, that the online tire offering was really a distress purchase, right? So what a lot of people will do with going to a bricks and mortar tire place, you've probably done it yourself, it's convenient because you can just show up, right? Who wants to plan getting their tires fitted a week in advance? People do that with Tires on the Drive now because they're used to that type of journey and they're used to that type of service. But really people don't care, well, most people don't care about tires that much. They just want them to be replaced when they've worn down to the point where they can't actually drive on them anymore, right?
Yeah, I've shown up at garages with like, it looked like a steering wheel rather than a tire,
Yeah. So it ends up being, okay, I need to get them fitted tomorrow. I might not be able to get into Quick Fit, so I just need to get a time slot and I need to go to Tires on the Drive. And this is why I'm using Tires on the Drive, because I can go onto them the night before and I can book. But what was happening was we had to do a data analysis. We had to scrape data from the front end to see all of the results that the average person was seeing, so we could see the tires that were being shown. Okay, and what we realized was that there was an array that was missing from the code. And anybody that knows programming, an array is just a collection of numbers, and there was just one bug in the code, and it was costing in conversion drop over $1 million a year. Just one piece of code that was missing.
Oh my God.
So we identified that through scraping the data, some data analysis. We got a data analyst on it, and we realized, okay, we're not showing the tires that we should be showing, because we had to scrape what was being shown on the old site versus what was being shown on the new site. We just had to diff it and see what the difference was. And we realized there's a group of tires here that we would normally show as next day. And the reason why it was even more complicated is we would only show some tires to be next day, because next day depends on availability, and it depends on what you can actually provide next day. Because you can't show all your tires next day, because you can't actually get them for next day, because they have to come from the supplier into the hub. So so there were some complicating factors. It probably sounds simple when I explain it, but there were some complicating factors. And we solved the issue, and it saved the company at least $1 million a year, probably more.
Did you ever find the person who wrote the code?
Oh, I know who wrote the code. Yeah. But that's fine. It was just, it wasn't their fault. It was something that was rushed out, and that wasn't the fault of the person that was writing the code.
So you had that Eureka moment again and was like, right, this is where it's...
Yeah. And I didn't do it on my own. There were other people as well, but it was something I was involved in, definitely, and something that I helped to drive while I was head of development at that time. So it was my job to do that. So
it's crazy that something that small can just have such again, that commercial, how it ties into the business commercially.
Yeah.
Oh, close to 1 million a year is crazy.
Yeah.
For one small book.
So that was an interesting one, yeah.
And look, last question, I promise I'll let you go. If you had to recommend a book, publication, a podcast, a certification,
I've written a list down.
A qualification. Oh, you have? Oh, fantastic.
I'm going to get the list. So two obvious ones. So it was a former colleague who put me onto these, the Phoenix Project and DevOps Handbook. So they're both Bibles for what we do in technology. Lots to learn from both of those books. So I highly recommend them to anyone who's involved in the areas that we're talking about today. I've already mentioned Team Topologies. So I went to talk, it was the offices of, I can't remember who it was in Manchester, and they had the author talking about the book, so that was quite good.
Wow.
I've got a free copy of the book, so that was a few years ago. And then outside of tech, but still really, really relevant, so there's a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, who's a Dutch journalist, I think he is. And it's looking at humanity and what drives humanity. And like, for example, we always think of Stone Age man as being the type that would hit each other over the head, and violence was something that sort of comes with humanity and being human. And he argues that's actually not the case at all. That actually war came about when we decided that we were going to own things, and farming came in, and somebody said, that's my land, that's my food, that's my town, that's my castle, that's my country. And that's when war really came about, when people started arguing over material things and ownership. And before that, we all collaborated and etc. So that's really, really interesting. I really loved reading that book. And it's recommended by Stephen Fry, which is always a good recommendation. And then I would say anything by Malcolm Gladwell. So particularly, there's one of his books where he talks about cockpit theory, and he talks about an example of the Korean Air. And they had cultural norms right up until the 1990s, I think, where they would always bow to seniority. And there was an example where everybody in the cockpit, apart from the pilot, knew that they were about to fly into the side of a mountain. And the pilot just refused to change direction, and nobody challenged him on it because he was the pilot and he was in charge, and they all flew into the mountain. And there was some figures that where they realized that the number of casualties within Korean Air was higher than anywhere else. So they had to look at that culture, subvert it, change it, and they ended up being one of the safest within a certain period of time. So it's that communication, cultural norms, just changing things around, how that can just completely transform your business, or how it could have, avoid, catastrophes such as many deaths in flying into mountains.
Wow, great recommendations. That's fantastic. Thank you. Well, look, Garrett, always amazing speaking to you. I'm glad we finally filmed this one. Yeah. Recorded it, and loads of nuggets of information in there. So thank you for doing it. And
yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, be soon.
Yeah. I'm just glad to welcome you to Regatta, and it's a great office, great company to work for. So.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next one.